Welcome to another edition of the Gray Matter live stream. Got a really great show for you tonight. A couple of friends and colleagues, fellow lawyers who are waging a battle that is very, very important, really, to all Albertans and really all Canadians, but isn't being talked about enough. And so we've got them here, and I think you're going to be really, really intrigued and, in some ways, appalled by the story that they tell. Before we get into that, I want to mention shameless plug, my book, Lies, Laws, and Liberties, just released, available on Amazon and Kindle. You can see it in the background behind me, and also in the video. And I wanted to mention the cover. Michael, if you could just freeze it. By the way, I forgot to mention our good friend Michael Klassen is alongside. The brains, if there is a brain, operating brain here, he's it.
I've got the
But
brain, you've got the beauty.
But I wanted to mention the cover because we've got a couple of lawyers here, and some people have asked me about the cover. What's the cover all about? Well, the cover depicts a man named Thomas More being taken off to be executed. And the reason why I chose this particular piece of art for the cover is because uh, Thomas More is now the patron saint of lawyers, and the reason why is because he was the chancellor, the sort of the attorney general, the minister of justice in England during the reign of Henry VIII, who, if you know anything about him, was one of the real titans of English history. Many stories about him. By the way, the story, if you're interested, is told in a wonderful play that was turned into a movie called *A Man for All Seasons*. It was made in the late 1960s. You can probably watch it for free on YouTube. It stars Robert Shaw and a host of other really great British actors. Anyway, the point of the story is Henry VIII, for various reasons of historical debate, wanted to break away from the church in England. And Thomas More was a very devout Catholic, and he was put into an awful dilemma. He was a great friend to Henry VIII. He was very valuable to him, but he had enemies within the realm, and they wanted him dead. And it turns out that he had to choose between the loyalty to his king or to his God, to his faith, which he saw as being represented by the church in Rome. And he chose his faith, knowing his fate, and he lost his head for it. And so the story of Thomas More, who incidentally wrote a very famous tract that isn't very honestly reported about called Utopia, one of the most overused words in the English language. It's always used almost incorrectly. The word actually means no place, by the way.
Yes.
Anyway, he died. He became the patron saint of lawyers for his loyalty. But I mention it in this context because he was someone who was willing to pay the cost of discipleship. He was willing to stand up for his beliefs. And he was a lawyer. He's the patron saint of lawyers. And the gentlemen we have on tonight are two really extraordinary men, Roger Song and Glenn Blackett. And they are sort of marching in the footsteps of Thomas More, hopefully not to their deaths, premature deaths or executions, but they are sticking their necks out. They are fighting an important fight where, unfortunately, many lawyers, many people in our profession, are not willing to do that. So I wanted to mention that in this context. The other preliminary thing I wanted to mention to folks is right now we have another lawyer featured on our weekly interview. Her name is Christina Bobb. That interview is out. This is a very fascinating lady. She's written a couple of books. She's been a lawyer. She's had the world's most interesting client, President Donald Trump. And she's been working for him. She's written two books about it. One is about the whole Mar-a-Lago search thing, and also another book about election interference. And guess what? She's being prosecuted just for representing Donald Trump, it seems. And so she sort of fits in with the line of the theme of the evening, as it were. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we also have out on the platform my most recent commentary, which is called "Lost to Barbarism," which sadly is very poignant right now, given what is going on in the world. Western nations recognizing Palestine, and other nations calling out Islamic terrorism and violence. So, with that, we turn to our guests, Roger Song and Glenn Blackett. Welcome to the program. Guys, I know you've been on before when we recorded an interview with you, I think a couple of years ago, but this is the first time you've been here on the live stream. Roger is a lawyer who came to Canada from China. He's going to tell that extraordinary story. He's come to Canada. It's a great Canadian success story. I know he's a very proud Canadian, and that's a big part of what you're going to hear about tonight. And of course, Glenn Blackett, who has been with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and also Charter Advocates, and he's a lawyer here in Alberta, and he's working very hard on this particular case, but also defending the rights and freedoms of other Canadians. So, welcome, gentlemen, to the live stream. It's great to have you on tonight.
Thanks very much for having us.
Okay, so
Thank
Michael's here, of course. He's pushing all the buttons, but I thought we could start with you, Roger. Now, I'll just sort of set this up for people. We're really talking about truth, right? And what these men are really standing up for is truth, and truth is being attacked on many, many fronts. And those of you who listen to the show know that we often phrase this, and I think quite properly, as a good and evil struggle. And the struggle for the truth, or to stand up for the truth, is vitally important. And that's really what's going on here. So just by way of setup, a few years ago, the Law Society of Alberta, which is the governing body for all lawyers, they sort of set the rules that we have to follow. They decided that lawyers would have to take mandatory education on Indigenous sensitivity, cultural sensitivity, cultural knowledge. This seemed kind of silly to people like me who actually are, I'm actually am a status Indian. I've spent much of my career representing Indigenous peoples. So honestly, I thought that maybe they should have consulted me and I could have had some input in constructing a useful course. But instead, what came out of it was sort of a 7th or 8th grade watered down social studies course that was very heavy on diversity, inclusion, equity, critical race theory, and other such fables that present a very distorted picture of Canadian history and the lawyer's role in it. In fact, I found it very demeaning to Indigenous peoples. I felt that the course that they've made us take, and this was made mandatory, folks, really portrayed Indigenous peoples as simpletons, as people without any agency, and who are just victims. And this is something that I think is pitiful and disgraceful, and it does a great disservice to Indigenous peoples. And in fact, when you boil it down, it dehumanizes. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that was the intention, but that always seems to be the effect of this type of quote unquote education. And so what happened was Roger Song decided that he was going to use the law to quite properly to challenge this. And so Roger, I'm going to get you to maybe take the ball from there and explain how and why you got started in all this, and maybe tie that into your own personal history, which is, folks, is really, really fascinating. Go ahead, Roger. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Leighton. Well, appreciate the opportunity to be alive first time on your show. It was always great to talk to you. I think first of all, I just give a little bit introduction of my personal background, and I will give some background of my application against the Law Society. And then I will leave it to my competent counsel, Glenn Blackett, to assess the decision that we just received from the court. So personally, on my personal background, I was born in Beijing in 1964 and grew up during the Cultural Revolution period of China from 1966 to 1976. And in China, I received a complete political competence education from primary school all the way to the graduate school of law at Beijing University. I was a good product of communist education and a devoted member of the Chinese Communist Party, what we call CCP, at the law school of Beijing University. But I decided to escape the regime of CCP China after experiencing the CCP's brutal suppression of a democratic movement at the Heavenly Peace Gate Square in Beijing on June 4, 1989. And eventually, I landed in Canada with my wife and my 4-year-old son as immigrants in 2000. I became a Christian in 2004. And I admire the foundation of Canada laid down in its constitution, which is the rule of law under the principles that recognize the supremacy of God. I went back to law school of Calgary University for a JD degree at age of 46 and became a member of Law Society of Alberta in 2014 at age 50.
That is
So I
just
was
Roger.
very
Just to
grateful.
stop you there, folks. This is just an incredible, remarkable story. In fact, I cannot even fathom how difficult it must have been just to get into law school in China, but then to decide that you were going to come to Canada, and then go to law school here and complete that. That is just such a remarkable story. I just want to stop and just people just to note that that is just an amazing achievement, Roger. Anyway, please continue.
Thank you. So, yeah, as you said, I was very grateful for Law Society of Alberta to accept me as its member and grant me the privilege to practice law in Canada, right? But on October 23rd, 2023, I filed my originating application for judicial review against the Law Society of Alberta. Here's why. In my application, I claimed that in direct violation of its statutory mandate, the Law Society of Alberta, through its benchers, had arbitrarily adopted a political objective, being the adoption of and the promotion of various related postmodern ideologies,
Right.
including critical race theory, critical legal theory, postmodernism, gender theory, and intersectionality. I call these theories the anti-constitutional ideologies, which are
Mm,
commonly collectively referred to as social justice,
right.
political correctness,
Hmm.
DEI, or
Yeah.
woke. I claim that the Law Society's political objective is intended to and it tends to affect A, the Canadian Constitution and the laws promulgated thereunder, de facto and ultimately de jure.
Mm,
B, the beliefs, expression, and conduct of lawyers, including A, in the execution of their duties under the Canadian Constitution as lawyers, advising, drafting for, negotiating for, representing, and advocating for clients as officers of the court and as judges.
yeah.
B, within organizations including law officers, corporations, nonprofits, professional associations, and government. And C, in their personal life and eventually have an impact on our society in general.
Mm,
I also claim in my application that the Law Society's political objective and its adoption and advancement of the political objective by use of its regulatory power is a direct violation of its primary duty to preserve the independence of lawyers and is therefore a gross violation of the rule of law. I claim
right.
that to advance its political objective, the Law Society has promulgated a series of actions and documents,
Mm,
including organizational changes, public statements, including an April 2022 Ventures acknowledgement of systemic discrimination,
mhm.
public research, including My Experience Project, curricula, mandatory continuing professional development, amendments to the rules of the Law Society of Alberta, June 2022 professional development profile for Alberta lawyers,
Mm,
and October 5, 2023 amendments to the Law Society of Alberta Code of Professional Conduct, which I call CODE.
yeah.
I claim that each of the above actions and documents incorporates the anti-constitutional ideologies. I give you a
Hmm.
highlight of two examples of how Law Society abused its regulatory power to promote and achieve its political objective. One example is the Rule 67.4 of the Law Society of Alberta. The other one is this mandatory cultural training program, as you mentioned, called the PATH.
Right.
The society mandate the rules of its society by adopting Rule 67.4 on December 3, 2020. And that rule gives the benchers the power to require the lawyers submit to such professional development as the benchers may prescribe in the form, manner, and time frame prescribed, failing which the lawyers are automatically suspended the day following the deadline. Under the Law Society Alberta rule, the term professional development used to have its own requirements, including it shall be relevant to the professional needs of a lawyer, be pertinent to long-term career interests as a lawyer, be in the interest of the employer of a lawyer, relate to professional ethics and responsibilities of a lawyer, or contain significant substantive, technical, practical, or intellectual content. However, Rule 67.4 excludes any requirement that benchers prescribe for professional development. It is an open path for the benchers to impose whatever education and training program they believe is professional development. For example, if the benchers of Law Society believe that all 10,000 lawyers in Alberta need to take a professional development course to be aware that you just cannot say openly and publicly, man only has two genders, male and female, because it makes certain people uncomfortable and
Right.
therefore is a harassment against them. So by Rule 67.4, they can impose that education under the penalty of automatic suspension without the consent of the 10,000 lawyers
Wow.
in Alberta.
Incredible.
Just to be clear, Law Society has not used the Rule 67.4 to impose a professional development on the cultural competence of gender, but it did impose a training on Indigenous cultural competence called the PATH 2 months earlier on October 6, 2020.
Yeah.
The significance of this program is that for the first time in 100 years history of Law Society mandated specific professional development on Alberta lawyers. The professional development it mandated incorporated the anti-constitutional ideologies, including associated assertions of value and fact, in a manner which required that lawyers expressly affirm the truth of the matters therein asserted by October 20, 2022. So pursuant to the Rule 67.4, the Law Society then automatically suspended 30 Alberta lawyers for failure to complete the PATH by the subscribed deadline. There are several alarming features that the Law Society failed to inform its 10,000 members when it announced the mandatory professional development program by the name of PATH. First, the primary researcher of the PATH, her name is Angela Day, has no legal training at all and was a research intern of Nationhood Council House. According to her profile on the website of Nationhood Council House, she is a First Nation people and holds a certificate in bookkeeping and is finishing her undergrad in political science with a complement in business administration at Agoma University.
I
was
had no
scratching my
idea.
head.
Yeah.
I said, why don't we ask my great friend Leighton Gray to give us some kind of a training on the First Nation issue? Why not? We have such resources. In Alberta, we have outstanding scholars, right? Francis Wilson. We have outstanding lawyers, Leighton Gray. They are all, they have connections with First Nation. They are researching on this issue. But why Law Society require lawyers, 10,000 lawyers to study a program under the primary research of such, background, right? I'm speechless, right?
Yeah.
That's the first feature. The second feature is the disclaimer of the PATH.
Yeah.
You see, the PATH only consists of 5 modules, but 4 of the 5 modules contain a disclaimer about PATH as follows. This video is for instructional purposes only. This video is not intended to provide a full, in-depth historical overview of Indigenous
I
peoples
remember
in
this.
Alberta,
Yes.
nor a full, in-depth overview of provincial and Canadian legislation, policy, and laws that have occurred over time.
Right.
This video briefly summarizes history and law and is only to be used as general background knowledge to begin your journey towards Indigenous culture competence in Alberta. Okay,
Wow.
fine.
Wow.
The third feature, the political agenda of the PATH. Recall that the primary researcher of the past, Angela Day, is a research intern of Nationhood Council House.
Mm-hmm.
According to this website, Nationhood Council House is the major promoter of the land back movement. It stated in its website that the 5 structures that define and sustain Canada and its continued land theft are doctrine of discovery, doctrine of reception, British North America Act, the Confederation, and the Indian Act. It says that settlers in Canada ignore the basic premise that this land has lived experience of thousands of years by the indigenous people and it was stolen. It says that there are thousands of non-indigenous lawyers in this country as they go about their livelihood. My first call to action would be to them do some self-reflection, ask where their law, the Canadian law, is originally stemming from. And then knowing that, why are they continuing to go about business as Europe? If the Canadian Constitution was imported in a matter of days, surely corrections can be made in a similar time frame. Each passing day of status quo is a day of unlawfulness that they help retain. The goal of the land back movement is ask for reset of Canadian laws and constitutive structures.
This
So
must
this
sound very
is the
familiar.
political objective.
This must sound very familiar to you, Roger. You know that we're in a we
Yeah,
must be
exactly,
in a perpetual state of revolution, right? The
exactly,
revolution never
exactly.
ends.
Yeah, so this the cultural revolution in Canada, basically,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
And why do we need it? Yeah.
So my question is why Law Society forced 10,000 Alberta lawyers to watch a video that is closely related to the land back movement with the goal of making a reset of Canadian laws and constitutive structures and calling Canada a perpetrator of land theft.
Wow.
To me, this is the act of high treason.
At least
Also, I would
it's at
like to
least
ask audience
propaganda,
to ask
right?
yourself, how can a law society of Alberta force 10,000 Alberta lawyers to watch this kind of video by designated deadline under the penalty of automatic suspension?
Yeah.
And what public interest did the Law Society serve by forcing 10,000 lawyers to watch this kind of video, which is only to be used as a general background knowledge and is not a full in-depth historical overview of Indigenous people in Alberta, not a full in-depth overview of provincial and Canadian legislation, policy, and laws that have occurred over time, as the disclaimer of this video even claimed.
Yeah.
So I claim that the Law Society's political objective, including the impugned acts, including Rule 67.2, 67.3, and 67.4, the political profile, the CPD 2, Part 6.3 of the Code, are ultra-virus the Legal Profession Act for reasons including Law Society has no statutory authority to violate the independence of lawyers, assume any objective outside its statutory mandate, oppose or undermine the Canadian Constitution, including adopting an extraneous objective, including a political objective, including the Law Society's political objective. And I also claim in my application that I am a Christian whose religious beliefs contradict significantly, if not entirely, with the anti-constitutional ideologies.
Right.
I claim that the impugned acts interfere with my religious freedom by requiring that I submit to re-education in, believe in, not express disagreement with, express agreement with, and actively advance the anti-constitutional ideologies, which requirements and ideologies grossly conflict with my religious beliefs and practice.
Yeah.
So to support my subjective views on the political objectives and the impugned acts of Law Society, and its whole scheme of abusing its regulatory power to impose anti-constitutional ideologies against the entire bar of Alberta, I submit to court my evidence as follows. First, My affidavit filed on October 27, 2023, with more than 900 pages of evidence. Second, my affidavit of March 11, 2025, with close to 400 pages of additional evidence. Affidavit of Dr. Joanna Williams filed October 27, 2023, as an expert opinion in support of the claims of my application. Dr. Williams is a scholar on the subject of social justice movement and wrote several books about wokeness, including How Woke When in 2022. In addition, Glenn Blackie, who is my counsel in this application, a lawyer who is not only highly competent by his legal profession, but also highly competent by his expertise in exposing anti-constitution ideologies and woke culture, in my view, filed his brief of more than 200 pages to the court on March 11, 2025, and his third reply brief on April 23, 2025, of more than 80 pages. The result, on September 12, 2025, oh, by the way, the application was heard in May this year. So on September 12, 2025, I received the decision of Judge Cuttrell, which is that the application for the judicial review is dismissed. The Law Society of Alberta has been completely successful in this application.
Wow.
Why? I will leave it to my counsel, Glenn Blackie, to explain why
That
and
was the
his
question I
assessment
was
of
going to
this
ask. I
court
mean,
decision.
it sounds like such a compelling argument that Roger lays out. It's hard to imagine that it would fail. The other thing that we have to note is Roger is in an extraordinary position to call this out. He lived through
Yeah.
this stuff in China, and wow, what it must be like for you, Roger, to have become a lawyer in China, which, by the way, folks, I understand can be pretty dangerous, and not only that, but difficult. And then to leave China, come to Canada, new country, because you're coming to a country because you're rejecting the ideology and the politics and the oppression of the place you're leaving, and you work as hard as Roger does, start from scratch, become a lawyer in Alberta, which is in Canada, which is not easy to do, by the way. It's one of the hardest places in the world to become a lawyer. And he does all that, and then he's faced with. He goes along a few years, builds up a flourishing practice. And then he's faced with the same stuff that he was getting back in China. But Roger, maybe you could explain to us, what is the court saying? Why aren't they accepting these very persuasive arguments that Roger outlined?
You want me to answer that, or
Yes,
Roger?
Glenn. Yeah, sorry, Glenn.
No worries. Well, I'll say this. I've written a lot of briefs in my life, and I've never honestly read a more compelling brief. I was pretty impressed with my argument. It was long-winded, but I thought it was kind of devastating once you really looked at the argument. But as I was writing it, I just kept asking the question, how can the court, like, first of all, what's the Law Society going to do with it? Secondly, what's the court going to do with it? And I realized they've got to avoid the topic. There's no way to address the topic and not agree with me. They've got to avoid the topic. And that's exactly what the court did. The court, number one, it decided not to look at all at the new sort of competency profile. So there's a new profile that the Law Society has basically attached on to the code of conduct, which dictates or defines what constitutes legal competence. And what it says is that in order to be fully competent as a lawyer, you got to be woke, and you've got to support truth and reconciliation as defined by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and as mediated by a bunch of leftist academics. So
that phrasing should be lies in conflict, because
right.
that would be a more apt description
Absolutely.
of what truth
Lies,
what
that's
their
right.
version of. But this is what the left does, right? They call good evil, right, and everything that is the opposite of what it actually is. Anyway,
Right.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm with you. My phrase is always lies and division. But I'm totally with you. But so what the court did was they said, okay, well, there's this new competency profile that lawyers are, judged against to determine whether or not they have a safe, effective, and sustainable practice. And the court determined that that's not the kind of exercise of state power that's even subject to judicial review.
Really?
So, yeah, like it's just the competency profile is not subject to judicial review. That's one thing they did. Also, this entire, we talked about the competency profile, the path, the rules, the code, a bunch of different sort of discrete things. But in the application, we say, look, the real problem here is that they've adopted this political objective.
Right.
And the Law Society is supposed to have the opposite. They're not supposed to have a political objective at all. Their job is to insulate lawyers from politics, right? Lawyers are the neutral
Right.
sort of referees of the system. We're not active in the political
Yeah.
field.
That's the whole point of self-governance, right?
Right. Yeah, right. And so instead of just, playing whack-a-mole with this project and that project, we also said, look, the entire political objective of the Law Society is wrong. It can't have a political objective. And if it's going to have a political objective, it certainly can't have one which is effectively the destruction of the Constitution. Like
Yeah.
that's presumably not a political objective that the Legal Professions Act contemplated the Law Society pursuing,
Yeah.
right?
No kidding.
So
the opposite. We're supposed to be guardians of it.
right, we swear an oath to the Constitution to uphold the
Yeah.
Constitution, meaning we accept the Constitution and the laws under the Constitution as they are. That's our
Yeah.
job in practice. We can
Yeah.
we can have a political opinion outside of practice. We can have a client who has a political opinion and somehow advance that political opinion in court. That's fine. But
Right.
as a
Right.
professional, our job is loyalty to the law and loyalty to the client, not
Right.
loyalty to some political objective, and certainly not loyalty to an ideology.
Yeah. We're supposed to
Um,
put our politics away, right?
Right.
And be dispassionate in the way that we present cases.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And certainly not, I mean, whatever, even if our client wants to change the law, we have certain, proper ways of doing that as a lawyer.
Right.
We can't, for example, like let's say the client doesn't like some environmental law, we can't help them skirt the environmental law, right? If
Mhm.
if they need some sort of a legal opinion that says, whatever, some guarantee was acknowledged or what have you, we can't help skirt that by providing legal opinions that are useful but not accurate. Like there's
Yeah.
lots of ways as lawyers we cannot behave. We have to behave with loyalty to the law.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, yeah, so back to your question, one of the things the court did was they ignored the issue, and they ignored the issue by saying we're not going to look at the competency profile. And secondly, they said, to the extent that you want to argue that the entire political objective is improper, we're not going to look at that either. That's not subject to judicial review. So,
Right.
bam, that's easy. And then the next thing the court did was, as Roger pointed out, that we had about, I don't know, 2,000 pages of evidence or something. And most of it is off the Law Society's website. So,
Yeah.
the Law Society says, well, you got to be woke. And you go, okay, well, what does woke mean? Well, you go onto the Law Society website and there's guides there that tell you what they mean by all this stuff. Okay. So
Yeah.
we pull all this stuff, we put it in our affidavit. It doesn't find its way into the Law Society's record, even though it was obviously accessible to the Law Society. Therefore, it should be part of the record. We put it in the affidavits, and the court says, I'm not going to look at it. I'm just not going to look at it.
Really?
Yeah. So the court didn't look at any of the evidence for the purpose of this sort of vanilla judicial review.
Okay.
But what the justice said, she did look at the affidavit evidence to some limited extent when considering the charter issues. But on the main issue, which is, isn't it improper for the Law Society to be encouraging lawyers effectively to attack the Constitution? She said, I'm not going to look at those materials where they suggest that. Yeah.
This is so much like COVID, isn't it, Glenn?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
just
it's a little bit
variations on a
gaslighting. It's hard
theme.
to
Yeah. Wow.
And
This must have been so frustrating for you and Roger to work so hard to create these expansive, beautiful arguments. And folks, this is a lot of work. I can tell you, I've done it. This is a lot of work,
yeah.
like many hours. And then you go in front of a judge, and they won't even read or pay attention to the stuff that you've produced. That must have been just incredibly frustrating for you.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I'm trying to do the Christian thing and, do God's work and let his will be done, not my will. So
Yeah. What and people listening to this, are probably wondering, well, this is just, what's this got to do with me? This is all about lawyers and lawyer stuff. But, coming back to what I said off the top, the battle that these gentlemen are fighting is vitally important, and it cuts across all of society. What they're really standing up for is truth. They're trying to, they want the truth told. And if lawyers are going to be taught certain things, they want the truth taught. They want courts to consider the truth. And this whole attack on truth is something maybe I want to move the conversation into, and how the case that you're doing is really at the epicenter of something that's going on, not only in the law but in society. Got a great quotation here from someone who wasn't a lawyer, but if he were a lawyer, probably would have been a great one. It's Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago. If you don't know what that is, you really should figure that out. It's one of the most important books of the 20th century. But he wrote this. He said, "Let the lie come into the world. Let it even triumph, but not through me. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. Line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." And that's what these gentlemen are talking about. They say, okay, well, we can't get rid of lying. It would be great if we could, but let's not lie to lawyers. Let's not make lawyers into liars. Let's not send them out in the world with lies disguised as truth. And this has a bigger context now. For example, and I want to get both of you to comment on this. How this really, what the case that you're talking about has really important implications in terms of the independence of courts and the independence of the legal profession, which is vitally important. But the federal government right now is dangling money at provinces and trying to get provinces to sign on to an agreement which says that the governments of provincial governments are going to instruct judges on how they're going to sentence offenders, that they are going to tell judges to look at a person's the race of an offender and look through that lens as a primary consideration on sentencing. And several provinces have taken the money and signed on to this, including Alberta. Danielle Smith suspended that agreement, I understand. But just think about what an important line has been crossed there, gentlemen. Like, that is huge. And I know this is part of the fight that you're fighting is, okay, we've got to stand up for truth. We've got to stand up for the Constitution, the rule of law. But how can we do that? And then we have you guys go in front of a judge and you say, well, the judge takes this position. Well, I got to keep my hands off this because, the legal profession is a self-governing profession. We have to protect, the sovereignty of the law society. But really, well, at the same time, these same judges are being told about how to sentence offenders by the federal government based on critical race theory. This whole issue of truth and the independence of the judiciary and the independence of law societies is really, really an important question, isn't it, right now, gentlemen? What do you think about that? Roger, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think personally, I'm a Christian. I just practice law on based on my faith.
Right.
And when I received this email from Law Society instructing me to complete that mandatory training program, I smelled something is terribly wrong.
Yeah.
At that time, it was during COVID-19. Everything was mandatory, right? Mandatory masking, mandatory vaccine. And then suddenly Law Society take advantage of this mandatory movement to impose this mandatory training under the gun, basically. They put a gun on my head saying, you don't do this, I will pull the trigger. That type of, I think, insult on indignity, on the dignity of independent lawyers. That is, to me, is abomination. I think I'm not signing up this. I came to Canada because Canada is a country built upon the foundation of the rule of law on the principles that recognize the supremacy of God, not on the principles of the EDI.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think I have a duty based on my experience in China to tell my fellow Canadians, we have to stop this nonsense.
Yeah.
Otherwise, our freedom will be empire at God's speed very,
Hmm.
very quickly, right?
Yeah.
I can see that over the last few years, how much freedom we lose.
Yes.
What society are we in is a chaos, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
The living expenses is high. Article students cannot find a position, right? Difficult to get a job. Even lawyer, if you work for a big firm, you're working for billable hours, right? You have
Yeah.
no time to reflect on your life, the meaning of your life.
Yeah.
So I have seen so many unjust judgment on so many unjust legislation.
Yes.
We are based on we are a country that based on this faith in God. God is life. God is freedom. But what
Hmm.
legislation we have? We have the legislation of the death culture, right? Legislation of euthanasia, legislation of abortion, legislation of drugs, legitimizing drugs, right?
Right.
If you
Hmm.
go to downtown Calgary, you see all these people, they're just like a living caucus, right, under the
Yeah.
drug.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think that the Canadian society is terribly, terribly sick,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so I think it is my duty just to tell the truth. I don't know whether I can make an impact or not. That
Right.
reminds me of those prophets in the Old Testament, like a prophet Isaiah, right?
Hmm.
Prophet Ezekiel, right? They just
Yes.
make a they just make a call, say, people, wake up, turn to God,
Yeah.
away from your wickedness. No use, right?
Hmm.
Israeli people didn't listen to that. But I think eventually, eternally, their voice has its value. I think that's my purpose.
Yes. Well, I think so too. And what you're really fighting for, I think, is truth. I'm pleased that you mentioned Isaiah. Isaiah is right over my shoulder, by the way. Do not fear. Uh, but Glenn, I want to turn to this now. Roger raised an important issue about sort of a sickness that's in Canadian society, and it's hard to put your finger on what that is. But one of the symptoms of it is really a loss of a sense of what's true versus what's false.
Mm.
And that's a big part of what we're fighting for. You guys are fighting for in this case, but it's also a big part of what you're doing and your work more broadly, isn't it? Like that the types of cases that you work on and you fight, you're really, it seems like you're bumping up against the same type of issues all the time, whether it's COVID or this one or um, arguing all the types of cases that you do at Charter Advocates. Do you agree with that, or what is your sense? Do you agree with Roger? What Roger's saying that this case that you worked on with Roger concerning lawyers is kind of symptomatic of broader concerns that are not only in the law but in Canadian society. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would. I mean, I'm not a Christian, so here's here's some theology from a non-Christian. But when I look at the Garden of Eden and the story of Adam and Eve, what I see there is a lesson in humility,
Mm,
right? The idea that it's not so much that humans can eat from the tree of good and knowledge of good and evil and know good and evil like a god. Rather, we we need to know our place, and our place is that we don't know.
yeah,
And so humans have developed ingenious systems for finding knowledge, but all of those systems depend on humility,
yeah,
and so to take an example, the university education system or the university system or science basically, it's not that science, and this is right out of COVID, right?
yeah,
Follow the science and
yeah.
trust the science and all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff, as if science, TM just farts out knowledge and we can just consume it, right?
Yeah,
That's not how science works, right? Science puts a theory there and we all try to challenge it, and there's systems for challenging it. And the idea is not so much that we're moving towards a truth, although individually we're all trying to find truth, right? It's more that we're kind of moving away from error, meaning as we get closer and closer to truth, we always acknowledge that we really don't know. We
yeah,
we have this kind of, I don't know, just ultimate humility about our position. So,
Hmm.
and in the university system or in science, there's a system for that. It's called the scientific method, and in
Right.
law, there's a system for that as well, and it's called the adversarial system.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so instead of using, it's the same concept though, right?
It's
That
all
you're
truth
gonna,
seeking, isn't it? Really?
right,
Yeah.
right, right. And so I think what we're seeing, we see it in universities. We've replaced this search for truth with truth,
Right.
capital T truth. And in the law, I think we're seeing the same migration from, you know, sustaining a system where a neutral judge can watch the parties battle in the search for truth and then try to make a neutral assessment of what the truth is, meaning both what are the facts and what does the law mean based on these facts, right?
Hmm.
We're moving away in all of our institutions from that system to one where we just have top down indoctrination basically.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a case, I'm not sure you've heard of the case RVI Peely.
Yes. Hmm.
And I think it's 2012 Supreme Court of Canada case. And in that case, the Supreme Court of Canada used this concept called judicial notice, which is supposed to be this
Yeah.
kind of limited, nobody talks about it. You
It
got to
was.
blow all the dust off the book
Yeah.
if you want to learn about it, sort of a
Yeah.
deal. And they said that the Supreme Court of Canada gave a direction to lower courts to take judicial notice of the fact that Indigenous people basically suffer from socioeconomic disparity with other Canadians because of the legacy of residential schooling and
Yeah.
systemic discrimination.
Yeah.
Which is, okay, that may be true. In the search for truth, that would be a proposal to put on the table. But the idea that it's the Supreme Court of Canada's job to dictate that truth to lower courts and therefore dictate that truth for our entire legal system, including everybody that might want to access that legal system, is just a profound inversion of, I think, the nature of our judicial system.
Right. It's judges making law rather than interpreting and applying law, isn't it? It's a changing of their role. And of course, we live in a system, like Roger calls it the rule of law, but implicit of that is this idea that the legislature is supreme and not courts. Having judges rule things is not a great system. You can read the Old Testament if you want to learn about that. But Michael, I want to bring you in on this because you're the only party in this conversation who isn't a lawyer, and that might make you the smartest person in the virtual room. I'd be willing to grant that. But I'm curious to know how this information, how is this hitting you? Like, are you seeing how important this case and the things that we're talking about are across society in terms of a trust-based society? I mean, if a person can't have confidence in their lawyer and they can't have confidence in their doctor, they can't have confidence that police officers are going to act dispassionately, that teachers are going to teach truth, that a judge is going to listen to their case, as Roger says, and try to sort out and reach a decision that's some approximation of the truth. We got a real problem in society, don't we? What do you think about that, Michael? Oh, I think we lost your mic there.
My apologies.
By the way, folks, Michael has a really fancy new mic. That might have been the reason why he wasn't. He's very proud of it.
I don't
You can
wanna
see it.
use
It's,
it.
it's a very Larry King show-esque mic.
That's right.
Beautiful
It's,
mic.
look at
Yeah.
3
Well,
pounds of-
when your name is Mike,
I know.
you should have a good mic.
You got to have a good one. You think about buildings and pillars. They all need foundations.
Right.
And for skyscrapers as tall as they are, they've got to go deep down into the ground. And so when foundations start to be eroded, that on one corner of your house or one pillar that's holding up your Colosseum, soon other things start to fall. And I was thinking about what Edward Bernays or Saul Alinsky might say. And of course, Saul Alinsky would probably say something he would remind us that power responds only to power, not to goodwill.
Yeah.
And so we have power plays involved. And of course, Edward Bernays would probably say something like the government must continue to craft those compelling narratives that will align public desire with policy objectives. And so it seems that this is a policy objective
Yes.
to move the actual pillars and foundations of our society that were built
Hmm.
upon, and to put them into a different stream. And it almost sounds like, I think Mark Carney might say, you know, you can all be damned, because we're moving these pillars whether you like it or not.
Right.
And you know, perhaps Dante might have written something about
Yeah.
how we react. I think he said, Dante said something about the darkest place in hell was reserved for those that didn't do anything
Hmm.
when there was an important moral situation like this on the line.
Yeah. Well, that wouldn't apply to these gentlemen. But you raise a
Not
really
these.
good point, and maybe we could finish off our conversation around this. Because part of what's at the heart of this is lawyers are being told what to think, and they're also being told what not to think. And of course, the liberals have a new bill coming out called C9 that's going to tell lawyers like me and like Roger and like Glenn and also everyone else what not to say, what not to post, or else. And the real danger that we're running into, we're already seeing signs of it. Of course, the most obvious one recently was that the Charlie Kirk assassination. Is these systems that we've developed have been refined over time and honed to resolve problems peacefully. That's kind of what Glenn was saying. So we can have arguments, but we can have peaceful arguments because we have the adversarial system. We can get to the bottom of a scientific problem because we've developed this scientific method, and that's what this search for truth does. It's a way of sort of strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, but we don't have to melt and burn up in the fire, unless unless we can't even have these discussions. And that's part of the problem here, isn't it, Roger? And that's kind of what you're driving at, is you're fearing that the same type of censorship and the same type of violence that was used in China to suppress dissent and to prevent peaceful problem solving through debate and through discussion, that same type of thing is happening right here in Canada. Is that a fair way of looking at it in your view? What do you think, Roger?
Yeah, exactly, Leighton. So when I came to Canada, when I read the Constitution of Canada, I was really, I think, enlightened to see the start of the Constitution saying Canada is built upon the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and rule of law.
Yeah.
That makes me reflect on the rule of law I learned in China. After the Cultural Revolution, China was kind of rebuilding itself. At law school in China, we learned a lot about the rule of law, right? At that time, our education is that rule of law is the rule by the legislation, not by the personal will of the great leader Chairman Mao. I think that's the difference, right? But that's a big
Hmm.
step forward. You have a set of rule published. People know the rules beforehand, and then you go by the rules. That's the rule of law.
Yeah.
But the situation in China is that, first of all, the Communist Party can always change the rules,
Mm.
right? The Communist Party can always interpret the rules the way they want, and they can always ignore the implementation of the rules, even if it's there.
Yeah.
So what's the point of rule of law, right?
Yeah.
But when I
Yeah.
came to Canada, I was reflecting on the relationship between the rule of law and the supremacy of God. If I
Mm.
may, could I just read some verses of the Old Testament which give us a
Yeah.
great light
That would
on
be
this
great.
on this
Yeah.
subject?
Please do that,
Yeah.
Roger. Yeah.
Deuteronomy 30, chapter 30, verses 15. See, today I have set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. For I am commanding you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commands, statutes, and ordinances, so that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God may bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not listen and you are led astray to bow in worship to other gods and serve them, I tell you today that you will certainly perish. and will not prolong your days in the land you are entering to possess across the Jordan. I call heaven and earth as witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. Love the Lord your God, obey him, and remain faithful to him. For he is your life. He will prolong your days as your life in the land the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Mm.
So to me, this gives me the insight that God is the true source of prosperity, freedom,
Hmm. And
justice,
truth.
and peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Canadians used to build upon this belief. Canadian
Yeah.
judges, lawyers used to believe in God, in God's fairness, in God's covenants. And
Hmm.
the parliamentary members used to believe in God. So when they, pass debate the legislation, when they, wrote the judgment, when they practice law, they act in that belief. That's how, Canadian is a society of love,
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
acceptance. I came to Canada not because Canada has this great idea of EDI. No, because EDI is a communism idea. I have enough of it in China,
Yes.
right? Communism basically has the critical features of equity, inclusion, and diversity, right? They give
Right.
you this rosy picture, but in the end, millions of people in China, you know, starve to death because of
Yes.
the literal implementation of this utopian ideology.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I came to Canada, believing that Canada is a free country. Canada is a country of love. It's a society of love. It's a society of truth. But law society now is interdicting the lawyers to replace the principles that recognize the supremacy of God with their own idea of EDI. I think
Mm.
that is very harmful to the rule of law
Yes.
in Canada.
Yes. That's brilliantly stated, Roger. Thanks so much for saying that. And by the way, folks, if you're interested, a couple of years ago, I wrote a commentary along these lines called Christian Constitution, and in it I point out how many of our legal structures, our constitutional structures, and even just the way that we run trials and solve problems are really stem from the Bible, especially the Old Testament. Things like the rule of law, the swearing of witnesses, a lot of even the whole concept of an adversarial system, all those structures actually come to us mostly from the Old Testament. In fact, the Old Testament even contains a map for the proper construction of a state, in which the framers of the U.S. Constitution follow very closely. 55 out of 56 of them were actually church-going Christians, or at least theists. There's a lot there to learn. Even if you aren't a Christian, the values that we're talking about really are vitally important, and they are a huge part of the culture of Canada and the way that we've done things for a very long time. And let's face it, on balance, we've done things, notwithstanding what the path says, we've done things pretty well over time. Canada has been a great country. It's been the kind of country to attract wonderful people like Roger Song, and thank God that it was that kind of country. I'm very proud and pleased that Roger is here, and that he's my colleague and part of the legal profession in this province. And this, I would say the same about Mr. Blackett. Well, unless any of you gentlemen have any closing words, we're coming up on the hour, and this is part of the program that we reserve just to sign off and thank everyone. And also, Michael, do we have any comments or anything from listeners or questions for our guests?
Well, we do have a thank you from Lindsay,
Oh, great. Yeah.
and then we also
Mr.
have
Song does deserve our thanks.
yes,
He really does. So does Mr. Blackett.
and then
Yeah.
of course we'll save. Here's Donald's comment here, of who watches the Watchers.
Yeah.
I don't know. It certainly
Yeah.
sounds to me like they're just changing the rules while you guys are trying to run the
Yeah.
football down the field,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the officials have all of a sudden said, "Yeah, sorry, now."
Roger's seen a lot of that. He knows what this looks like. And, it may be, quoting Esther, maybe, he's here for such a time as this. Maybe God placed him in the gap, and he seems to really believe that's true. I certainly do. But Michael, why don't we turn it over to you for our closing prayer? Hopefully you don't mind, Glenn, but we usually
No.
close off in a prayer. I'm going to say on air that I pray that you find the Lord. He loves you, and he should, because I know you're a wonderful man. But Michael, go ahead if you
Yes.
could lead us in a closing prayer, please.
Well, Lord, as Pontius Pilate asked the Savior, what is truth? We pray that there would be a revelation of truth and light in the hearts and minds of those that govern Canada and in the various branches of government. And we also pray that that the steps would be ordered, just like your word says, the steps of a righteous man would be ordered. So we pray that righteousness would be something that officials and others search for and quest for in their goings. And may we all, as it says in the book of Proverbs, in all our getting, get understanding and get wisdom. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks so much for that. And gentlemen, I want to thank you. As a lawyer in Alberta, I'm so grateful for the work that you've done. I just pray that somehow the seas are going to be parted and these judges are going to finally see the light. But I thank you so much for the work that you've done, and thank you for being on the program tonight to talk to people, make them understand the importance of this. So I just want to thank you both for taking the time to be on the program tonight, and wish you all the best and Godspeed and in all the work that you're doing.
Thanks very much for helping us
Thank
get the
you,
word
Leader.
out.
Okay, and thank everyone who tuned in tonight. We're so grateful for your interest in the program, and we hope that you found this content meaningful. And God bless all of you. Good night.
Good night.